Hey guys, I'm Matt, a developer from Ohio. In this video, we'll go over using Git, setting up a local repository, and connecting your repository to GitHub. This video is specifically for using Git and GitHub from a PC. If you're using a Mac, the basics are the same, but we do have another video for that. Also, this video does assume that you know a bit about the command line and Git in general. If you find yourself a bit lost, you may want to check out our Learn Command Line or Learn Git lessons. In this video, we'll learn to create a GitHub account, set up a local Git repository, and connect a local repository to a GitHub repository. First, let's talk about the difference between Git and GitHub. Git is what we call a version control system. Like the name implies, systems like Git allow us to save versions of our code. Without version control, your files get overwritten every time you make a change. With version control, you get a history of every change ever made. This allows us to more easily revert changes and work with teams. When your project is managed by Git, we refer to it as a repository. GitHub is a popular hosting service for Git repositories. You can think of it like a Dropbox or a Google Drive. Your project and all the previous versions of your project can be stored in the cloud. This offers a safe backup and easier collaboration over the internet. Another similarity to something like Dropbox or Google Drive is that there are many options for hosting your repository. We're using GitHub because it's free, trusted, and easy to use. When you become a more advanced Git user, you can choose whichever host you like best. The repository on your computer is called the local repository. The copy saved to GitHub is called the remote repository. In this video, we'll start a local repository on your own computer, then sync it with a remote repository on GitHub. We need to make sure that we have everything set up to do this. If you've already done some of these setup steps, you can skip ahead. First, make sure you have Git installed on your computer. If you haven't done this, just search for Download Git on Google and you'll arrive at this page. Follow the installer instructions and you should be good to go. If you need more help setting up Git, you may want to check out the Learn Git lesson that I mentioned earlier. Next, you'll need a GitHub account. When you go to github.com, you'll see a registration form right away. Pick a username, then enter your email and a password. That's all we'll be doing on GitHub for now. When you installed Git, you should have gotten a program called Git Bash. To find it, open the Start menu and type in Git Bash. Git Bash will look familiar if you've worked with the Windows command prompt, because both are a kind of program called a shell. You can think of Git Bash as a specialized version of the normal command line, specifically for running Git commands. To make sure that an installation of Git is working correctly, we can run the version command. This will print out the version number of the current Git installation if it's working. That's git -- version. If you don't get an output like this, you might need to reinstall Git. Now that we know that Git is working, we need to configure it. You can skip configuration if you've done it before, but it won't hurt to do it again. First, we'll set the username. This isn't the same thing as your GitHub username, although you can make it the same if you want. This is the name that will appear on your submissions, which are also known as commits. For example, I'll set mine to Matt. Anyone who comes across my work will see that it was done by Matt. We start the command with git config. Then we'll add the global parameter to specify that we're configuring all repositories on this computer. Then user.name to specify which parameter we're changing, and then our desired username in quotes. We'll do the same with email. Unlike the username, this should be the same email that you used to register on GitHub. This is how your commits are attributed to you. Again, we'll start with git config global. Specify user.email this time, and finish the command with our desired email address in quotes. I'm just going to use email@example.com. Now that we're all set up, both with our local Git installation and our GitHub account, we can make a new repository to test it out. Use the change directory command, cd, to navigate to somewhere on your computer. This will be the place where our new repository will be created. I'm going to navigate to C, Codecademy, Git, but you should navigate to wherever on your computer you want the repository to end up. Use the make directory command, mkdir, to make a new folder. I'm going to name the folder Git Practice. And we'll use cd one more time to move into Git Practice. Now we can see that it's over here, and I'll move into it. We can use the git init command, short for initialize, to start a local repository in the Git practice directory. You should see some files appear in the directory. These are the files that make Git work. You won't need to edit them for this example. Despite these important Git files, our repository is still considered empty. We need to make a change like adding a new file. A common first file is a README, which is a TXT document explaining a little bit about the project. So I'm going to right-click, go to New, and add a new text document. I'm going to call it readme.txt. This example, I'm just going to write hello Git and GitHub, and then I will save and close the file. Now that we've made a change, we can stage it using git add readme.txt. This tells Git that we want to track changes related to this file and record them. This is also known as staging the README file. We'll use the git commit command to submit the changes to the repository. We'll also add the m parameter, short for message, and write a commit message. The message will be shown when looking back through versions. You can think of it almost like a label for this version of the project. It's good to write something descriptive, like add readme.txt, because that's what we just did. The commit I just made is now part of the local repository, meaning that this snapshot of the project is saved. Even if we make changes, we can always go back to this state. We can use the command git log to bring up a list of all the commits in this project. But this is just a local repository. To get a copy of this repository onto GitHub, we'll need to do what's called pushing to the remote repository. This means that we'll use the push command. However, we need to connect a remote repository before we can push to it. In fact, we haven't even made a remote repository yet. Let's go to GitHub and set one up. We're on GitHub because our remote repository will live exclusively on GitHub. Remember that it will be a copy of our local repository. We can select the New Repository button to start making a new one. If this is your first repository, you can also select Start a Project. On the next page, we'll need to give the repository a name. For the purposes of this example, I'm going to keep the name as Git Practice, so that the local and remote have the same name. We won't worry about the other settings in this video. You can change them if you want. When you're ready, click on Create Repository to finish the process. Now the repository has been created in the cloud. This is basically the same thing as when we typed git init, except it happened on GitHub servers. The URL shown here is the HTTPS address of the repository. Just like a website URL, this is the location of the repository on the internet. We need to tell Git where the remote repository is so that it can push the content of our local repository. The instructions for this are shown under Push an existing repository from the command line. GitHub makes it easy for us. We can just copy and paste these two commands. You'll be asked for a username and password. This is because only you can push to a repository that you own, at least by default. So I'm going to go ahead and type in my username here, which is CodeAcademyMatt, and then it'll ask for my password. Note that you won't actually be able to see the characters of your password as you type them. This is a security measure. Someone might be looking at your screen or watching a video of your screen on Codecademy. So I'm going to type in my password here, and then we'll wait for that push to complete. If we refresh the repository page, we'll see that our README file now appears on the remote repository. You'll also be able to see the contents of the README file below the files, because GitHub automatically detects files with that name and displays them for others to see. In this video, we discussed the differences between Git and GitHub, installed Git, and set up a GitHub account. We created a local repository on our computer and a remote repository on GitHub. We added, staged, and committed a change to a local repository. Finally, we used the push command to sync the local repo with the remote repository. I'm Matt for Codecademy. Happy coding!